Hello, welcome back. So today we are going to be making eclairs and I'm so excited for this. So let's just dive right in with our mise en place for our eclair paste, also known as pâte à choux. So we have 240 milliliters of milk, 240 milliliters of water, 9 grams of salt, 210 grams of unsalted butter in a small dice, 300 grams of bread flour, and then I have about 10 eggs, or anywhere between 480 between 528 grams. And then I just have a piping bag with a normal round, one of those large round piping tips for our eclair paste when we pipe it onto the pan. And then I also have a little folded piece of parchment paper to measure how long I want my eclairs. And then, of course, my mixer, and we have some vegetable oil in the back to spray our piping bag so the dough doesn't stick. I began by adding the milk, water, salt, and butter into a saucepan, and then I just brought that to a boil and I made sure the butter was fully melted. And then I removed that from the heat and immediately added all the flour. And then I just vigorously beat the dough and put the pan back on the heat. And I continued beating it until it came away from the sides of the pan and started leaving a film on the saucepan. And then I added it to my mixer. It should look relatively dry. You want to be sure that your mixer has the paddle attachments on, but after I added my dough to my mixer, I beat it for a few minutes on medium speed so it could cool down, and then I began adding my eggs one at a time, and I just continued adding them until my mixture was shiny but firm, and it may not be needed to add all the eggs. I left out one and it was perfect. The dough pulled away from the sides of the bowl perfectly. And then when it was time to pipe them onto my cookie sheet, I sprayed the inside of my pastry bag with the oil, and then I just added a workable amount of dough into the pastry bag. You don't want it too full so it doesn't squeeze out the top and it's just hard on your hands, and you also don't want to put too little so you're not having to refill every 2 seconds. And then I just piped my desired shapes onto my cookie sheets, and the parchment paper for measuring the size I wanted worked out really well. You just fold a piece of parchment paper several times and it gives actually the perfect size, to be honest. And I did make a little bit of a few cream puffs. I did make a few cream puffs as well into little balls just to try a different shape. So whatever shapes you want to do, pipe those onto your cookie sheet. And then once you get the hang of the size, you can pretty much eyeball it. So after my eclairs were perfectly piped onto the pans, I baked them immediately at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 minutes, and then I reduced the heat to 350 degrees and I baked them until they were dry and crisp. The book says 35 minutes, but for the size I did, it actually ended up being around 20 to 25 minutes. So time will vary depending on the size of product you're making and where you live and your oven. So you do want to keep that in mind. And then to test for doneness, when the eclair paste seems to be baked through, you want to remove one and you can let it sit for 1 or 2 minutes. And if it doesn't collapse, the eclair is sufficiently baked. And then you just want to let them cool completely and then fill as you want to. And then any unfilled pieces can be frozen or stored at room temperature. Moving on to our pastry cream, we have our mise en place, and I have 1 liter of milk, and then I have 1 vanilla bean. Then I have 225 grams of granulated sugar, 180 grams of egg yolks, and then I have 75 grams of cornstarch, and then I have 60 grams of unsalted butter. I began my pastry cream by bringing my milk, vanilla bean split, and 120 grams of the sugar to a boil in a non-reactive saucepan. In a separate bowl, I whisked the egg yolks, and in another bowl, I combined the remaining sugar and the cornstarch, and then I just whisked that sugar mixture into the egg yolks all together until it was well combined. And then I tempered the yolk mixture with about a third of the boiling milk, and then after that was tempered, I returned the yolk mixture into the pan, and then I just cooked that all, making sure you're stirring constantly until the cream boils and is well thickened. And as you can see, it thickened up very nicely. And then you just want to allow that to boil for 1 minute, stirring constantly because you do not want this to burn. And then I stirred in the butter and just until it was gently melted. You do not want to overmix, and that will thin the custard if you overmix. And then I just placed plastic wrap on the surface of the custard, making sure it was tight, touching the custard, making sure the plastic wrap is touching the top of the custard to prevent a film from forming. And then I just chilled that over an ice bath and then refrigerated. And before you use the pastry cream, you want to remove the vanilla bean. We are at the final stage of making our delicious eclairs, and you can see I have the ingredients out for our chocolate glaze. So just to go over the mise en place, it's only 4 ingredients, super simple, is 180 milliliters of heavy cream, 30 grams of corn syrup, 240 grams of bittersweet chocolate, and then we have 30 grams of unsalted butter. I added my bittersweet chocolate to a bowl, and then in a saucepan on the stove, I brought my heavy cream and my corn syrup to a full boil, and then I removed that from the heat and poured it over the chocolate, and then added my butter, and then I stirred it gently until smooth, but you want to make sure and be careful not to incorporate any air. And then I just made a piping bag with a small rounded tip and then filled that with pastry cream. And then I just made 3 small holes in the bottom of the eclairs with the piping tip. I just poked it straight through that bottom layer and then just filled it with pastry cream. And you can tell when it's perfectly filled because it becomes so much heavier and too full if it starts coming out the sides. And then I just finished them off by glazing them with the chocolate glaze, and then I plated them up, and the one cut in half you can see is nice and full with cream. Now, obviously, they are not perfect, but being my first time ever trying this, I am pretty darn proud of myself and I love the way these turned out. They tasted so good and exactly like cream puffs from the store. Obviously, these ones have chocolate on them, and I've never had any chocolate glazed cream puffs or eclairs or anything like that before. And it just turned out so good, and I cannot wait to make more of these in the future. I did my best not to let this video go over 5 minutes, but this is my first time doing a project or making a video with this many steps, so I did my best to explain everything as fast as I could, but I think this might be over 5 minutes, so sorry about that, but again, I'm super excited for future recipes, and this was a great module.